Whenever I had my first job, I got my first kind of full-time real job a few years ago, and there's kind of a switch that like clicked in my head, and I realized that I didn't know anything about finances. I didn't know anything about budgeting. I didn't know anything about like saving or like retirement. Do you like plan for that? How much should you save? How much insurance should you have? What about, I don't know about credit. What is a credit report? None of that. I didn't know any of that. But I had this realization that I didn't know anything, so I started kind of pretty intensely looking at it and trying to learn. Talked to a couple, I got advice, kind of looked up articles, got advice. Our bank had financial advisors that would kind of like, you could like talk to, and they would give you advice. And I had this great conversation with this one guy, and I was like double checking, triple checking, quadruple checking to make sure I was doing the right things, because I worry. And he, on the phone one day, after giving me some really good advice, was finally just like, all right, Joe, I want you to do one more thing for me. Just relax. Like, you're going to be okay. You've done the right things. Relax. Enjoy your life. Which was great. It was like a burden off my shoulders, because I realized, like, I'm kind of like following the rules here. I'm following the financial rules. I'll be okay. And for a lot of us, we love these kinds of rules. We love, yes, keep calm and following. That was like my motto. Keep calm, follow the rules for finances. And we love to do that kind of thing for finances. We love rules for maybe our careers and making sure we're going to be kind of successful in our careers and following steps and habits to do that. We like rules for relationships and following those. It's kind of comforting to know that if we just follow these rules or just practice these habits, we'll be okay, or we'll be successful, or we'll be safe. We also do this with God and with our faith. We kind of like the idea that we're defined as good Christians if we just follow certain rules. It's comforting to know that if we just have the right habits, or maybe don't break certain lines, don't break certain laws, that we're kind of in as good Christians. Or maybe if you don't think of yourself as a Christian, or kind of don't have that kind of identify as that, maybe even think or have thought of Christianity as almost like this set of rules out there. There are people who are rule followers. Those are what Christians are. Pinched finger. Just relating to that, I have memories of doing that as a kid. Okay. Big rule, don't pinch your fingers. That's we might even think of our faith a little bit like, there's a video here I want to show you, and we might be able to relate to this in how we think about following rules as in faith.
Hello, welcome to the first Christian church meeting. Here are the rules. Rule number 1, spend all of your free time in church. Rule number 2, you're not allowed to have any fun unless you're laughing at how dumb the devil is. Rule number 3, wear t-shirts with my face on it. Rule number 4, always smile and act happy. And finally, wear a stylish beard like mine. Hello. Welcome to the first.
We don't need to watch it twice. It's okay. I guess it's on a loop. So that's kind of a caricature of what a lot of us think of Christianity looking like, right? Like, it looks like always being at church. It looks like wearing Christian t-shirts. It looks like external things. Like, the external things are what's really important for looking like a Christian. Way back in May, we started a series in the Sermon on the Mount. And it's this sermon, this teaching that Jesus gave while he was standing on this mountain. So it's creatively called the Sermon on the Mount. And we've spent the whole past summer focusing on the Sermon on the Mount. And it's been challenging, and it's helped us kind of get a feel for what is it like to really follow Jesus. And today we're going to look at the final part of that sermon, and the conclusion of that sermon. But to kind of understand what's going on in that conclusion, we need to sort of look back to understand what Jesus is going to say in the conclusion. So, you guys, do you guys remember what we've talked about over the summer? Just some of the subjects. We don't need to go in depth. Jesus. Very good. In the Sermon on the Mount. Money, yes. Money, kind of giving God. There's actually a lot about money in the Sermon on the Mount. A lot, especially about not worrying about money, about trusting God. Yep. Sorry? Yeah, the Beatitudes. And that's almost like the introduction to the Sermon on the Mount. So way back in May is when we talked about that. Yeah, and it's a totally different way of seeing the world. Like, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the meek. Like, those are the people who are happy and fortunate. Anything else? One more? Prayer, yes. Yeah, so one of the things we talked about with prayer was, it was actually the Children's Storybook Bible, the video we watched earlier. That was actually kind of a take on that thing about prayer. And Jesus talks about, don't try and impress other people when you pray, but pray to your Father who's in heaven in secret. The point of prayer is not to impress other people. The point of prayer is to communicate with God. Some of the other things that we've talked about are anger, forgiveness, loving our enemies, anxiety over money. We talked about that. Generosity, I guess that was another part of talking about money. Loving others as we love ourselves. One of the themes that's emerged during this whole summer is this idea that it's really hard to make what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount into these precise rules. Jesus, actually, it seems like he almost intentionally makes it hard to do this. We sometimes do this with what Jesus says, but as we've dug into the Sermon on the Mount, we've discovered that it's actually really hard to precisely define kind of rules and lines that we shouldn't cross from what Jesus has said. And Jesus is going to say a little bit more about this in the conclusion to the Sermon on the Mount. So let's take a look at that together. This is Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 through 27. And this is Jesus speaking. He says, "Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the road is easy that leads to destruction, and there are many who take it. For the gate is narrow and the road is hard that leads to life, and there are few who find it. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorns or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear good fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will know them by their fruits. Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. On that day many will say to me, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many deeds of power in your name?' Then I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Go away from me, you evildoers.' Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on a rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall." There's a lot in these verses, but one thing that the verses don't have is that they don't say anything about recognizing a follower of Jesus because they smile all the time, or they wear Christian t-shirts, or they never have any fun except for laughing at the devil, like that video talked about. Specifically, Jesus actually talks about miracles in these verses. And what he says about miracles is that, or many deeds of power is how it's phrased. What he says is that that's not even how we recognize a follower of Jesus. Like, miracles aren't even how we recognize a real follower of Jesus. It's not about what's flashy. There's only one way to recognize a follower of Jesus, he says, and it's fruit, the fruit that comes from their life. So miracles are a good thing, but the fruit is how we actually know what a real follower of Jesus is. And obvious question, what is the fruit? The fruit is doing God's will. So some really well-intentioned Christians think of the fruit of following God, like how you really identify a true follower of Jesus are miracles or evangelism or living a obviously kind of holy and set-apart life. And all of those things are actually really, really good. But that's not the fruit that Jesus is talking about. The fruit is doing God's will. So what does that look like? What does bearing fruit look like? So let's look at that passage again. This is verses 13 through 14. Jesus says, "Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the road is easy that leads to destruction. And there are many who take it, for the gate is narrow and the road is hard that leads to life." Now, there are two details that are in this passage that I want to take a look at. And this is going to be worth it because it's going to show us what the fruit is like of following Jesus. First is that word for road. In some translations say way. What's interesting is that when Jesus says, okay, guys, here's what doing God's will looks like. It's a process. It's a way to get somewhere. It's not like a set thing. It's actually a way to get somewhere. It's not a destination. Following Jesus, doing God's will, is an invitation to a process. The illustration that Jesus uses is a way to get somewhere. It's a way to live. The second detail is that word for hard, and that just means like to apply pressure, but people would use that word to as a word to use to when they would talk about squeezing grapes, to squeeze juice out of grapes, maybe to make wine or something. Pressure creates something good in us. So following Jesus is hard, but this way of life, it isn't easy, but it's hard, and something good is created in us through that process. There's a pastor and theologian named Eugene Peterson who wrote this. "It's so key to remember that following Jesus is a lifestyle on the move. We don't stop to admire what we've accomplished. Rather, we press on to what lies ahead. William Faulkner said, 'They are not monuments, but footprints. A monument only says, at least I got this far, while a footprint says, this is where I was when I moved again.'" Following Jesus is a lifestyle that's on the move. It's a lifestyle of following Jesus' way. We're changed and we grow as we follow Jesus. There was once when somebody asked Jesus what the most important part of the law was, so the law in the Old Testament, and there's lots of laws in there, so they asked, Jesus, what's the most important part of the law? And this is what Jesus said. It's in Matthew chapter 22. He said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Doing God's will comes down to loving God with everything and loving others as ourselves. There are rules in relationships. There's rules in romantic relationships and families and sometimes even friendships. But it'd be sort of weird if we made rules the focus of relationships. So at home, one of the things that I do, one of the rules, quote unquote, that I follow is I do the laundry. But it'd be really strange for me to say, I have a really great marriage because I do the laundry. That's like the height of my marriage, right? Why everybody's laughing? Some people are laughing. Some people are. Okay, we have yeah. That's all it takes. Just the laundry. Well, doing the laundry is an expression of love, but it'd be strange for me to go, look, Sydney, I have loved you well this week because I did the laundry. That's not the end of the point of the relationship. But we do this in our relationship with God. Jesus directly says that the most important commands are relational commands, not do X, Y, and Z. It's loving God with everything. And of course, rules come out of that, right? Rules come out of that. There's disciplines and practices and ethics and morals that come out of it. But the most important thing is loving God with everything. Doing laundry is not the height of my marriage. It's an expression of love, hopefully. Following Jesus is a way of living life where we're growing in love for God and love for people. That's what doing God's will is. There are practices that come out of it. There's disciplines that come out of it. There's ethics and morals. We're changed by that, and it affects how we live. But that's the point of following Jesus. So we have a choice. Jesus makes this really clear. There's two roads. There's two foundations that we can build our lives on, rock or sand. One way is how the world works. And help us remember the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus speaks about these things. So we can live how the world works. We can get even with people when they make us angry. We can make and break promises to get our own way. We can love our friends and family, but get even with people that we don't like. We can be generous with our time and money when it's good for us. We can make our goal in life to store up treasures on earth. We can stress and be anxious about money. That's the way the world works. And I think that most of us are so used to living that way. That's just the world system that it's weird. It's countercultural to think or live any other way. It's just normal. So there's a video I want to show you guys, and it might feel a little bit like this. Trying to change might feel a little bit like this video. All right, so question for the kids here. What was the thing that Moana, this is from Moana, what was the thing that Moana wasn't supposed to do? What? Cadence. Go to the water, yeah. She wasn't supposed to leave her island. Go beyond the reef. Right, so she could go part way off the island, right? But only so far. Not into the, kind of beyond the reef, into the open sea. So her village, who's seen Moana? All right, so, okay, like half. So it's this story about this village that's in this self-contained island, and nobody leaves the island. That's kind of the theme. Like maybe like a long time ago, some of their ancestors left, but nobody leaves the island. That's the rule, because it's dangerous out there. It's scary out there. Nobody thinks that there's another way to live. It's countercultural to leave the island. But Moana, through her grandmother, kind of feels called to go and leave the island in this boat. She feels called to this adventure. She's called to live in this countercultural way. So, kids, what does Moana do? Does she stay on the island? No. She leaves. Yeah, she goes beyond the reef, yeah. And so you guys, in a lot of ways, we're all living on the island. And the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus' invitation to live in a different way. It's an invitation to leave. We assume that there's only one way to live. That's our culture. But Jesus offers us a different way. He offers us this invitation to come on this adventure and leave the island. Jesus invites us to reconcile with people rather than get even. He invites us to be true to our word and our commitments. This is all in the Sermon on the Mount. There's a lot more, but he invites us to respect rather than use people. Jesus invites us to forgive our enemies rather than getting even. Jesus invites us to be generous with our time and our money. He invites us to bring him our anxiety. Following Jesus is a way of living life where we're growing in love for God and love for people. It's a countercultural way to live. So kids, one more question. Did anything like scary happen to Moana whenever she left? What happened? A bunch of things happened actually, but her boat crashed. What else? I'm hearing answers from adults here. Wait. What was it?
And Maui went away because he wouldn't help her to restore the heart.
Yeah, it's a complicated story, but yeah, somebody was with her, he left, and it kind of got scary because remember that there was a giant clam too? The hermit crab. Sorry, hermit crab. Yeah, a hermit crab. Wasn't there?
The coconuts.
I'm sorry, I've only seen it once. Yes, a giant hermit crab that kind of tried to steal this magical stone that she had. Okay, you guys, bring it back. We gotta bring it back. Steer that boat back to on course here. You guys, following Jesus isn't easy. It's scary. Jesus says so, right? He says the road is hard. The adventure of following Jesus is not easy. It's hard. Jesus is pretty honest about that. Forgiving isn't easy. Giving Jesus our anxiety isn't easy, but it's worth it. As we go on that adventure with God, God changes us. So I just want to invite us, let's go on that adventure with God. There's a different way to live that Jesus invites us to. He invites us to be changed by going on this adventure with him. Let's pray. Jesus, let us catch a vision for the way that you call us to live. Let us see the countercultural way that you offer us to live, the freeing, good way that you offer us. Lord, let it never be about checking boxes or obsessing over rules, but let it be about life with you and, yes, disciplines that free us. Lord, but let us catch a vision for following you. Lord, and I pray for all of us that you would be speaking to all of us in really specific ways about what that looks like for us, whether it's giving you worry that we have in some area of our lives, whether it's forgiving someone, whether it's going the extra mile and serving others. Jesus, would you come and speak to us? In Jesus' name, amen.